Today I'll show you how to staple pages together in Interform400. There are two ways of stapling pages. Either we can print out each individual page in the spool file a number of times and staple those copies, those identical copies together. Or we can go through the spool file and then whenever we have a level break, for instance if we have a new receiver or a new document number, then we want to staple those pages together. But in order to staple, there are some prerequisites that needs to be met. So first of all, we need to print to the right output bin, so that we need to place the printed paper in the right bin, so that we select a bin that supports stapling. Then we need to enable stapling through either copy management, where we are printing or stapling multiple copies together, or by using a finishing definition. Then we select the exact printer, manufacturer and model that we're using. If this printer is not listed or supported in Interform400, you still have the possibility to create your own PGL sequences in order to support stapling on as good as any laser printer, as long as it supports these PGL commands for stapling. When you do the merge, you need to remember to use a PGL printer type. So that means for black and white printing, you need to go with an HP4 PGL or HP4D for duplex PGL printer type in Interform. Or if you're printing in color, you need to go with HP4500 or HP4500D. Finally, you would of course also normally need to set up this printing, the stapling in Autoform's control, and I'll show you how to do that. And keep in mind, especially when testing, that you cannot staple one page. You need to have at least 2 pages before Interform and the printer will actually start stapling. So let's go a step deeper and look into how can you select the correct output bin. First of all, you could do some manual testing, for instance from a Windows PC, and make sure which drawer or which output bin you need to select in order to be able to staple. And then the challenge is to make Interform print onto that as well. So let's take a look at Interform. So in order to select the output bin, we need to have let's say like a table to say when to select which output bin on the printer. And in order to set that up, you go into option 80, administration, then 8, work with printer control options, and here you have option 3, output sorter definition. So here you need to add with F6, add the output queue where the printer is attached, where the physical printer is attached. So this is not the output queue you're monitoring in Autoform's control, but where you place the merged spool files. So we intend to make stapling on a printer connected to the output queue PRT01. And in this case, we are selecting a default output bin of 1. So this is the code we are actually sending to the printer. So please note that this value may not be the real output bin 1 in the real world, but it might be a different mapping between the number here and the actual physical output bin. But this will be the output bin that we will select normally, and when I hit enter, you can set up rules for specific spool files that if these are sent to the printer, then you want to do something else. And you can select the types of spool files in 2 ways. Let me just go in here. You can select it either by specifying a specific overlay, or you can select a specific user profile. So you could actually print out the output from Interform into specific bins depending on who the user that created the spool file originally. If you are selecting the special output bin by overlay, you need to specify not only the overlay name but also primary or secondary. This primary secondary is an option that makes sense if you are using copy management, and if not, then just keep in mind always to use one primary unless you really know you're using a secondary. So this primary secondary field should be filled out if you're using an overlay. So in this case I am selecting output bin 5 on this specific printer. Goody. So that actually takes care of this. So we have set up a selection of the correct output bin, and remember this output queue you're merging to, that's where the printer is attached. So next thing, we need to set up the stapling, and as I mentioned earlier, one of those ways is to use copy management, so you print out multiple copies of each page and then staple them together. And in order to set this up, you need to go into the green screen designer. So let me just go back to the Interform main menu. Here we go. So you select first of all the correct file set you're working in, and this is for demo purposes, but for normal production you shouldn't of course have any overlays in your sample file set. But here I actually do have that. So let me just select my stapling version here. So I have made a specific overlay, and that overlay is now going to staple. And of course I should add this overlay into my output bin selection as well if I'm using this. So here for stapling, where we are using stapling multiple copies, I am first enabling copy management here, hit enter, say how many copies I want, and now when I hit enter I can now define if I want stapling or not, and then that is for the set that are where I have multiple copies. So if I had multiple copies for secondary as well, I could also activate stapling for secondary merges. So here I've activated stapling, and when I hit enter I'm now prompted for the manufacturer, and I select here it's an HP printer, and then Interform is listing up the printers that we know of, where we know the PTL sequence in order to support stapling. So I hit enter, and that's actually it. So now I've set up my copy management in order to be able to staple. Good. There is an alternative where you can staple per recipient. When, for instance, if you want to staple a complete spool file together, or whenever you have a level break inside. And for that you need to create a stapling finish definition. And let's take a look at that. So here I go into option 5, work with autoforms control. Option 4, finish definitions. Option 2, staple, where I've defined my staple definition earlier. You can create here a finish definition with the type 02, which means of course stapling per recipient. If you are even using copy management with this, you would need to specify the overlay that you intend to merge with later on. I'm not combining them here, I'm doing one or the other. So that's why I just keep it blank. And again I'm prompted for the exact printer manufacturer and model. After this I need to tell Interform400 when we have these level breaks, when do we have a change of document, so Interform know when to staple. So let's take a look at this. In order to create such a sequence number, you press F6, add. In this case it's very simple. I have my data which is actually the Interform demo spoof file that you can create from the service menu of Interform. And here we have a 4-digit number in line 13, position 57 to 60, and whenever that number changes, then I want to stable, so any pages that have the same number there should be stapled together. So I just hit enter, and now I've also prepared my finishing definition. Yeah. I mentioned the list of printers that for which we actually know the PGL commands, and they are actually included in Interform400. But if it should happen that you are not able to find your exact printer in these lists, then you can create your own PGL stapling sequence. And if you are in doubt of what that actually is, then you can refer to the manual of this printer, or you can from Windows print to file and then open that output, that PRN file in, for instance, Notepad, and read the PGL sequences inside to find out what is actually needed. So let's say that you have done that, and now you want to go into Interform and define your own PGL sequence. So from the main menu, I now select option 80, Administration, option 8, Work with Printer Control Options, and here we have option 4, User Defined PGL, and here you can define a group, and that could be some printers that are actually sharing the same PGL sequences, or that are very alike. And inside of that printer group, you can define one or more functions. So it could be that you have one function that would staple in the top left corner, be that you have another PGL sequence for making two staples or stapling in another position. So that explains how to define your own PGL sequences. Let's move on. So finally, when you have set it all up, you need to go into Autoforms control and set up the automatic merges and the whole setup so that the stapling is actually enabled. So let's take a look at how that is done. So from the main menu, we go into option 5, Work with Autoforms Control. Option 1, Functions attached to output queues. And here we have an output queue set up to monitor the output queue PRT01_in. So that is an input queue, and this is where the printer is actually attached. So please note that this was the queue we referred to earlier on for the output bin selection. Also note that we are using a printer type here with PGL. I hit enter, and now you can see what we need to do if we want to do stapling with a finishing definition. So we defined a finishing definition, and that in turn, when we call this from Interform400, or actually from Autoforms control, it will create a new spoof file, and that new spoof file should be merged. So what happens here is actually that you need to make sure that the original spoof file, and let me just go in here and look at this sequence line. So the original incoming spoof file from your application needs to be uniquely identified, and I've done that here through the form type. So say that my original spoof file should have exactly this form type. Remember, it's case sensitive. If that is the case, then I'm calling my finish definition, which is preparing for the stapling. The new spoof file is placed onto the same output queue with asterisk input, and the form type of the new preliminary spoof file is stable in. So that's my input for the merge. Please make sure here that you're not creating a loop. So the new spoof file you're creating with this stapling should not fit the condition for this sequence number. So if I set stable fin here with the same case as here, then I would have made a loop in Autoform's control, and you definitely don't want that. So here, stable in, and that is my input for my merge in line 3. And here I'm merging, doing a normal merge with an overlay. Also setting the output spoof file name to stapling. If I don't want to staple per recipient through a finish definition, but actually through copy management, then we want to do it a little bit different, actually more simple. We do quite a normal merge, and we just need to merge with the overlay where the stapling is activated. So before we end, I'll just like to show you how it looks on the output queue. I've previously made a bit of a test. So here my input spoof files look like this, and they are actually held as soon as Interform or Autoform's control has done its work. When this spoof file arrives, I'm creating this PRS print spoof file, which is actually the input for the merge. Let me just delete this and release these two spoof files, and then we can take a look at the output queue where we are placing the merged data where the printer is attached. So here we have the two merged spoof files, and one will copy or print each page 3 times and staple these 3 copies together, and the other one will staple any pages that are more than if we have more than one page for a recipient, then they will be stapled together, and that is actually the case for the demo spoof file. So with this, I hope you have now a pretty good idea of how to staple with Interform400. If you need more information, then please refer to the Interform400 manual or contact your local Interform400 support. Thank you. Goodbye.